So looks like we are pretty close to being able to dive in. Again, I'm Nora with Kearns and West. I'm helping facilitate tonight. And what that means, if you've been to a recent GPAC meeting, is that I will help keep time. And my interest here is making sure our conversations are productive and constructive. So to that end, I will go over our agenda this evening. We do have a pretty interactive session lined up, though the first portion of it is presentation heavy before we get to the real meat of our small group discussions. So we will go into that in just a moment. I do want to welcome folks to the room. I'm wondering if our GPAC members who are here can raise their virtual hands using that reactions tab on the bottom. Just raise your virtual hand so that everyone can recognize you and all of the time that you have dedicated to this process thus far. And just a big thank you for being here this evening. Our GPAC members will hopefully be here for the small group discussions and be able to help carry over conversations that they've had, as well as carry back the community input from this evening into subsequent GPAC meetings. So thanks again for being here. I do want to introduce next our town staff. So if I could have GPAC members take their virtual hands down, and town staff, we have a lot of planning staff here tonight to help facilitate. If you can put your virtual hands up, we can recognize you. And maybe Danielle Nishimori, our Community Development Director, and Jenna Gatto, our Planning Manager, can also maybe just wave at the camera here. And so you'll be a key part of this workshop tonight as well. And Danielle will be helping with our presentation. So I wanted to introduce them. So thanks, town staff, for being here. Next up, I'd like to have you take your hands down, and we'll ask the Ascent, our planning consultant team, to put your hands up, and particularly Chelsea Payne and Kim Untermoser, if you can wave at the camera. You'll be presenting here this evening, and if you've been attending GPAC meetings, you know Chelsea and Kim. And finally, I have two staff helping with my facilitation team here tonight, and that's Mary Beth and Bethany, and they'll be helping with our small groups also. I do also want to recognize that we have some council members and our town manager in attendance. So thanks also for making time to be here, and really for all of our community members who have chosen to spend your Thursday night with us. Big thanks. So with that, I think, Tracy, we can go to the next slide here. All right, so here's our agenda for this evening. I want to recap the reason why we're all here this evening is to provide an opportunity to discuss the land use alternatives for the Truckee 2040 general plan update, and listen to community preferences and thoughts about the specific focus area, land use option. Focus areas are places where land use changes may be proposed, and talk about what townwide alternative would be in your minds the right fit for the town of Truckee. So we'll first hear a presentation from the planning team to get our bearings before we have those small group discussions, and we'll see a comparison of the townwide alternatives as they are now. But we do have a interactive sort of a puzzle piece exercise lined up to help support our small group discussions tonight. And then finally, we'll come back together as a large group to hear a recap of each other's conversations before we wrap up no later than 8:30. So because we have a lot to get to, we're going to ask that folks hold questions through the presentation. However, if you have a clarifying question that you think would benefit the room to hear the answer, we want to, please do type it into the chat if something is unclear. And if our presenters are able to, in the course of their presentation, they will make an effort to answer that. If they're not able to get to it because of our time constraint, we'll make an effort to answer it in our small group, and our planning experts can come and visit our small groups to help provide those answers tonight. And if we still aren't able to get you the information you need tonight, town staff is always available to discuss this in more detail. So that's what we'll do. I'll give a few more instructions we get to the small group exercise, but I want to make sure that we can get to our presentations. And I do see a note in the chat that it's hard to see the presenters because of the screen share. If you go to the top right-hand corner of your screen, you may be able to adjust your view by clicking on that view button and get a better setup for the screen that you're looking at right now. Okay, so I think with that, we are able to go ahead into our presentation, and Danielle, I think we'll bring you up first.
Great, thanks everyone for being here. It's really just a fun opportunity for us to be able to do a virtual workshop, and we do have other opportunities for people to participate. So if you feel like you didn't get enough time tonight, or you would like to just discuss things with staff directly, we have other opportunities, including this Saturday at the farmers market, an in-person workshop next week. So that one will be sort of a go at your own pace, but the same information, but you might find that to be a different way to engage with us. And then equally, we will be posting a survey similar to the questions we'll be asking tonight online. So really the goal is to try and provide a variety of methods for people to communicate. So if you know someone who didn't come tonight but has ideas, they can pick up paper copies from us. To do the survey, they can go to the 2040 website to look for information to be able to participate in the survey online. So it's really just a variety of options. And the resource is really going to be the Truckee2040 website. That's where we're posting everything. That's where this video will go. And that's how you can engage with us. If you check the chat box, we went ahead and put the link for that in there too also. So a big thanks for everyone participating. I think this is one of our highest numbers, which is really encouraging. So it's great that we got the word out and everyone's here. So what I'm going to do tonight, and let me take a step back. So my name is Danielle Nishimori. I'm the Community Development Director. I've worked for the town for about 19 years now, and I participated in the 2025 general plan. So I was a much younger planner at that point in time, but it was really fun to participate, and I love the interaction that we get with the community. So for those of you that haven't participated in the past in the general plan update process, it really is a document that the town uses to convey sort of our vision as a community. And every city, county, and town in California has a general plan, and they use it as that guiding tool to make decisions. So there's a lot of information in it that's broken out into chapters. Those are called elements, and they really are specific to sort of the community's needs. And although the state has, requirements for what some of the things we have to look at, you have to look at housing, you have to look at sort of transportation, things like that. There's a lot of flexibility to tailor your general plan to your community. And so Truckee already has a community character element and an economic development element, which are different than other cities may have. Some cities that are more urban may focus more on transportation and have something specific to their sort of needs with their numbers of community members, but those were important ones for us at the time. I think we can go to the next slide. So within all of these elements, there's a variety of policies, there's kind of programs, and there's future actions for us to take as a town. And all of this is based on the feedback that we get from the community. So it's really important for us to hold workshops like this and have community engagement, because it's our ability to check in and see how things are going with the community. If we didn't do that, we would miss sort of changes that are going on. A lot of cities have stale general plans that have sat for maybe 20 years, and it's really hard for them to know where to go next. How do they treat growth? How do they treat preservation, development, different aspects of what their community's future is when they don't do a check-in? So this is really our opportunity to plan for Truckee's next 20 years and make sure that we're capturing our vision, and that with all the actions that we take, both as our government and as a community, really reflect who we are. So some of the things we're going to talk about tonight include sort of our land uses. What do you see out in the community? And there's obvious things like our businesses and our homes, but when you kind of pull back at a general plan level, it comes to a lot of mapping. And so we're going to look at a lot of different maps tonight, but these maps are included in one of the elements in the general plan called the land use element. And it really identifies how we want to break up the community to address sort of our future needs. So what you're looking at on the screen right here is our current 2025 general plan land use designation map. And I know these terms could get a little confusing, so be sure to talk to your facilitator in your breakout groups if you need sort of clarification of what we're talking about. Planners try not to get stuck in jargon world, but sometimes we do. Really, when we talk about land use designations, we're talking about specific sort of intensity of uses and locations of where things are going. So when you look at this map, you see different colors. Well, all those colors reflect our different land uses that we have in the community, whether they're commercial, industrial, public, open space, residential, kind of all those things. So it's really important for us, like I said, to look at these because say right now we're having our sort of issues with housing. Well, do we need more land available to accommodate our housing needs, or do we not have enough of something? So this is the time when as a community, we come together and we talk about how to fulfill those needs so that we can have a strong economy, that we can preserve our character, we can have the open space available that we want, all these things. I think a lot of people are more familiar with the term zoning because that might be something you would work with when you're a business or you just kind of heard that term more frequently. The zoning works concurrent really with our general plan. So it's like a top-down approach of general plan is the big picture policy document. And then under that umbrella is the zoning. And the zoning is where you get into very specific details about development standards, what are my setbacks, where can I put certain uses, how tall can my building be, things like that. But if you didn't have a general plan with that overview vision, you would have a hard time coming up with what those standards are. So they really work together. On this slide here, we just put this together since we have some participants that are new to our process that we really did start the general plan update in November of 2018. And as part of that, we did some focus discussions with the community. We talked about visioning. We looked at, we created a general plan advisory committee made up of community stakeholders to help our planning commission and council to kind of look at, what's missing in our current general plan? What do we want to look at in our future general plan? Kind of packaged all that information. And then we started looking at the land use alternatives portion of the process in about fall of 2019. And that's where we're at right now. So it's been a lot of hard work by our GPAC. It's been a lot of community involvement, not just with this process, but collectively the town staff holds all this information that we get, whether it's in other public meetings or things like that. And we use that as part of this process. So tonight we'll be discussing land use alternatives. And then once we come up with a preferred land use alternative, so sort of that map that shows what we want to plan for in the future, that'll go to the planning commission and then the council for us to kind of move throughout the process with the goal of hopefully having an adopted general plan, the 2040 general plan next summer. So that's our goal. And I think that was my last slide. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chelsea Payne with Ascent, and Chelsea's going to do the rest of the presentation for everyone.
All right, thank you, Danielle. I'm Chelsea Payne, Director of Urban Design and Planning at Ascent, and I'm going to go over the first half of the materials on the land use alternatives, and then I'm going to hand it off to my colleague, Kim, who's going to cover the town-wide land use alternatives. But first, a little bit about the land use alternatives briefing book. This is a report that our team published last week, and it's really the culmination of all of the work that's been done on the land use alternatives over that past year and a half. There's a lot of information in this report, and we're not going to be able to go into all of those details tonight. So I would encourage each of you to download a copy of the briefing book, review it, have it on hand for reference as we go through the exercises tonight. And you can find a copy on the project website at www.Truckee2040.com. So I think maybe someone can drop that direct link in the chat as well, so you could all go directly to that site. So the goals for this land use alternative, there are 7 goals that are shown here, and these are the goals that are driving this process. They're based on all of the community input that we've received from the beginning of this project. So the goals for this process have been to protect and enhance Truckee's unique small town mountain character, to promote sustainable land use patterns, preserve natural resources and open space, increase housing opportunities to better address local housing needs, provide enough land to accommodate jobs year-round, and as part of that goal, to meet the demand for industrial land specifically. And then last but not least, to make the Truckee River a focal point in the community. So all of the alternatives achieve these goals, but as you'll see, some of the alternatives emphasize some of these goals more than others. The briefing book also describes 4 big ideas that the land use alternatives are based on. The first big idea is encouraging mixed use development along corridors and within neighborhood centers. And the concept of mixed use is about providing flexible land use designations that encourage housing to be intermixed with jobs and shopping so that people can live close to where they work and where their daily services are. And there are a lot of potential benefits of mixed use, creating more vibrant places that are planned around people instead of cars, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and reducing the need to expand into outlying areas because you're using land more efficiently. The second big idea of the land use alternatives is diversifying the housing stock so that we're allowing for different types of housing that better address Truckee's housing needs. So currently, over 85% of Truckee's housing stock is single-family homes. And the land use alternatives propose to broaden the allowable density standards to increase multifamily housing opportunities that can provide more affordable housing for the local workforce. And we'll get into those details a little bit more. The third big idea is to provide a land use framework that supports a modern economy. And the alternatives process introduces a new business innovation land use designation. And this designation reflects the broader range of uses that are occupying some of the industrial spaces in Truckee. So those are light industrial and office, but also some more customer serving uses like breweries, coffee roasters, gyms, and retail. So this designation would not allow for the more land intensive industrial uses like warehousing or outdoor storage yards. And those uses are also still important and need to be accommodated somewhere. So one of the key questions being asked in this process is, should we move industrial uses off of the river? And we're going to get into that question in our discussion tonight in the small breakout groups. The final big idea is about maintaining Truckee's character through smart growth and resource preservation. The land use alternatives focus on growing up in key locations near the downtown that are already designated for development, rather than growing out into natural open space lands beyond the town boundary. We recognize that there are several big challenges facing the community that also need to be addressed in the general plan. We know that the pandemic has had major impact on the Truckee community, and there's still uncertainty around what the long-term changes might be, particularly as it relates to the housing market. And we have some data and some discussion of that in the briefing book. The constraints to town-initiated rezoning of residential land to open space is also an issue that's come up a lot in this process. And we're going to talk about that a little bit tonight, but the briefing book discusses this constraint along with some of the potential tools that are available for open space preservation. Wildfire risk is also a topic of great importance to the community, of course, and we're going to delve into this in a lot of detail in the safety element, and that's going to be coming up in the next phase of this project. And then, of course, last but not least, climate change is recognized as one of the greatest threats, and Truckee recently prepared a climate change adaptation plan and will be preparing a climate action plan as part of the general plan elements. We acknowledge that these are major challenges that we're going to have to address in the general plan, and then the briefing book talks a lot about each of these. So coming back to the land use alternatives, to understand the differences between the land use alternatives, it's really helpful to understand 2 types of metrics that are used in the general plan to regulate to regulate development, floor area ratio and density. So floor area ratio, or FAR for short, it's used to regulate how much building square footage of non-residential development is allowed. So commercial, office, industrial, and mixed use. And it's a ratio that's calculated by dividing the floor area of a building by the total site area. So for example, an FAR of 0.2 means that the building floor area can be up to 20% of the site area. And you can see that in these simple diagrams that are shown here. It's a pretty crude metric because it doesn't really tell you how big or what shape the building can be. And as Danielle alluded to, the general plan FAR is usually supplemented by more specific standards in the zoning code related to setbacks, height limits, and those other important standards to guide the character of development. So we're really talking at a really rough scale of FAR when we look at these land use alternatives. The current general plan has an FAR of an average of 0.2 for all non-residential land use designations. And a 0.2 FAR is typical of auto-oriented commercial development that has large surface parking lots. So the Safeway Shopping Plaza is an example of a 0.2 FAR. So that's what's encouraged under the existing general plan. A 0.35 FAR allows for slightly more compact development and for some more interesting building configurations. So the Rock on Brockway Road, that's an example of development at about a 0.35 FAR. And this is the FAR that we're proposing to use for commercial and industrial areas that are outside of the proposed mixed-use corridors and centers. A 1.0 FAR allows for more development on a site, and buildings would typically be about 2 to 3 stories, maybe with retail on the ground floor and offices or residential units above that. And at this scale of a 1.0 FAR, you start to support more pedestrian-oriented building types. Residential density is the measure of the number of housing units that are allowed per acre of land. And the current 2025 general plan, it generally limits residential densities to 12 units per acre outside of the downtown and master planned communities. There's one site that's designated at 16 to 18 units per acre, a pretty narrow range, but it doesn't include densities between 12 and 16 units per acre. That density range of 12 to 16, that allows for attached townhomes, smaller apartment complexes like Hennis Flats and Frischman Hollow are in that density range. And the existing general plan also doesn't designate land for densities above 18 units per acre. So the land use alternatives are trying to fill this residential density gap. We're proposing residential designations at 12 to 18 units per acre and 18 to 24 units per acre. And you'll see as we go through the alternatives that these new designations are used pretty selectively throughout the town to provide some opportunities for high density residential in appropriate locations. I also want to acknowledge that there are several planning efforts that are happening right now simultaneously in the town, and you may have been involved in workshops related to these other efforts. The town is in the middle of a study called Innovate Gateway along Donner Pass Road. The hospital is in the middle of a master planning effort. The town is also updating the downtown specific plan. And the town is also doing what they're calling the SB2 housing sites analysis. And that process is exploring opportunities to rezone land for workforce and affordable housing. And all of these efforts will eventually roll up into the 2040 general plan and be reflected in the general plan land use diagram. So I'm now going to get into the land use options for each of the focus areas. And the land use alternatives are centered around the 5 focus areas that are shown here on the map. This is really going to be the focus of our discussion tonight. These are the areas where potential land use changes are being considered. And I'll point out that each of the focus area options has a calculation of development capacity. And this represents the existing development on the ground as of 2018. That's shown in the bolder shade on the chart. And then the net new capacity on vacant land or sites that could be redeveloped. And that new capacity is shown in the lighter shade on the chart. The net new capacity isn't necessarily what's going to happen over the 20-year timeframe of the general plan. It really more closely represents what the total capacity could be at some unidentified time in the future. But it's just one way to sort of compare what could happen under each of the land use changes. So diving into the focus areas, our first focus area is Donner Lake. This is the area surrounding Donner Lake, of course, and it's primarily residential. There is a commercial area on the western end of the lake around the marina, and there are some existing businesses on the eastern stretch of Donner Pass Road. There are two land use options for consideration for Donner Lake. What you're going to see with each focus area is that option one always represents a continuation of the existing 2025 general plan. So it's sort of our base case option. And option one for Donner Lake, it continues the general plan designation of commercial on the west end. That's the area shown in red. And then the eastern end is residential. There are existing businesses, but this area is designated for residential. Option two introduces a new mixed use designation to these two areas, and that's shown in light pink on the map to the right under option two. And these pink areas, the mixed use areas, would allow for a broader mix of uses. So it would allow for some additional multifamily housing and support additional neighborhood services along Donner Pass Road. The goal is providing more services nearby so residents and visitors wouldn't have to drive into town for all of their services. The next focus area is the gateway area on Donner Pass Road. I just want to pause to say I'm going to go through these fairly quickly, but we are going to review these again in the breakout groups and you'll be able to ask some questions there. So the second focus area is Donner Pass Road. This area, as you probably know, is an important commercial corridor. The Tahoe Forest Hospital is also in the area. And as I mentioned, the hospital recently started a master planning process, which is going to propose expansion of the medical center. There are four options for this focus area, and the first two are shown here on this slide. The first option is the continuation of the existing general plan, which designates most of the corridor as commercial. That's an average floor area ratio of 0.2. It also allows, commercial does allow residential densities at 4 to 12 units per acre. So that's the area that's shown in red along the corridor. Option two replaces the commercial designation with a mixed use low. That's the light pink area, and that allows up to a 0.8 FAR and residential densities of 6 to 18 units per acre. So at these densities at this scale, 1 to 2 story buildings would be typical. The public designation, which is the light blue area on the map, would be modified to allow workforce housing in conjunction with educational facilities. Option two also designates the area around the hospital with a new hospital campus designation. That's the dark blue area. And that would allow for the expansion of the hospital. It would change from a floor area ratio average of 0.2 up to a maximum floor area ratio of 1.25. And housing would be allowed at 12 to 18 units per acre. The Upper MacGyver site, which is shown here with a green icon, under option two is redesignated as hospital campus. And it's actually redesignated in all options 2 through 4, but option two has a policy to study the potential for preserving the site as open space. So I want to call attention to this site because we've received a lot of community feedback and questions about this site in particular. And the Upper MacGyver site is shown here on the map, outlined in blue. It's an undeveloped site located east of the hospital. And the site was rezoned from open space to residential at 16 to 18 units per acre in order to address an affordable housing need that was identified in the previous housing element. So this site was zoned in order to comply with some requirements of state law. Once a site is in the housing element, it is more challenging to redesignate it for something else. So in order to do that, you need to find an adequate replacement site. And then beyond just state law, there are also potentially issues related to regulatory takings. So if a property is zoned for development, and then the town takes action to designate that property for open space that essentially removes the development rights on the property, that action could be considered a regulatory taking and could present some legal challenges for the town. So it's not to say that it's impossible. There are several open space preservation tools that the town could explore, such as a transfer of development rights or acquiring the land. So option 2 in the land use alternatives includes a policy to study the potential to preserve this site as open space. So getting back to the focus area, there are 2 more options for Donner Pass Road. And the only difference between option 2, which was that mixed use low on the previous slide, and options 3 and 4 are the mixed use areas shown in pink. So in option 3, that the commercial area along Donner Pass Road would be designated mixed use medium, that's that pink color. And this would allow a range of uses up to a 1.25 FAR and housing at 12 to 24 units per acre. So instead of 1 to 2 stories of mixed use, you might see some 2 and 3 story buildings. Option 4 applies mixed use high, that's the darker pink color. And this would allow a floor area ratio up to 2.0. This could be 3 to 5 stories, and multifamily housing at 24 to 55 units per acre. So that's roughly the densities that you'd see in the rail yard area, so for comparison. Under options 3 and 4, just like option 2, the hospital campus and the public designation would allow for workforce housing. So those are the same in these 2 options as they were in option 2. The next focus area is North State Route 89, and this encompasses the Grays Crossing specific plan area and the industrial areas near the Pioneer Commerce Center. There are 4 options here, but they are very minor differences between the options. Option 1 continues the existing general plan, which designates the area in and around Pioneer Commerce Center as industrial. That's the dark purple color on the map. And it reflects the land uses allowed under the Grays Crossing specific plan. Option 2 redesignates the Pioneer Commerce Center as business innovation. That's that new employment designation. That's the light purple area on the southern part of the map. And so this is really to reflect the type of development that's already occurring here. It's a mix of industrial, retail, and coffee roasters, fitness centers. Option 2 also allows for workforce housing at the Alder Creek Middle School. That's designated public, the light blue color on the map. Options 3 and 4 only differ slightly from option 2 by introducing some different residential density ranges to one of the residential parcels in the Grays Crossing specific plan. And that's the brown parcel that's east of Highway 89 on this map. The parcel is currently designated medium density, which allows 6 to 12 units per acre. That's really a single family density. You might get some duplexes and some very low density multifamily. But option 3 would designate the parcel to medium high density at 12 to 18 units per acre, which would allow for more attached housing, potentially some more multifamily. And then option 4 would designate this parcel as high density residential at 18 to 24, which is a true multifamily apartment density. So really the differences between 2, 3, and 4 are really just that one parcel. The West River area is our fourth focus area. And this area is west of the downtown, and it predominantly consists of industrial uses located along the Truckee River. This focus area has the most number of options. There are 5 different options that are put on the table for West River. And option 1 is the continuation of the existing general plan. And most of the area is designated and built as industrial. That's the dark purple color on the map. The parcels on the south side of West River Street are designated for mixed use, that's in pink, and for high density residential, shown in brown. And those are the designations under the downtown specific plan. Under the current downtown specific plan, this area is included. We've pulled it out of that plan area and are now addressing it through the general plan by applying general plan land use designations. Option 2 emphasizes employment uses in the area. It maintains the industrial designation on the north side, and it designates the south side as business innovation. And that business innovation, again, would allow for a mix of jobs, industrial, but also those more customer serving uses like breweries, fitness centers, and also would allow for live work units at up to 12 units per acre. And live work units are where you might have a small business with the owner living on site. And so this option 2 is really about preserving and improving the area as a job center. Option 3 for West River is about allowing for a broad mix of employment and housing opportunities in the area. It designates a larger portion of the area as business innovation rather than industrial. And so again, this allows for that broader mix of industrial and customer serving commercial uses. And that would be on both sides of the road. And then it also allows for live work units. This option also applies the highest density mixed use designation and the high density residential on the south side of the road to emphasize housing on those parcels closer to the river. Option 4 applies a new riverfront mixed use designation. And this designation would require a master planning effort that would be focused on transforming the area from a job center to more of a residential neighborhood with commercial services. It would also emphasize the preservation of open space along the river. And an economic study would really need to accompany the master plan to understand what development mix, what incentives would be needed to make it feasible to move the industrial uses off the river and attract new housing and commercial uses to the area. So under this option, there would be a loss of industrial and commercial office space that would be replaced by residential. Option 5 is what most closely reflects the current riverfront revitalization strategy. The river revitalization strategy was prepared in 2005, and it describes actions to revitalize underutilized lands and address environmental degradation on the riverfront area. In the West River focus area, that strategy envisions making the industrial to the north of West River, maintaining that area as industrial, but improving the industrial area, wrapping it in live work units. It envisions residential and a hotel or retail use on the site closest to the river and calls for increasing public access to the river. So again, this option most closely resembles that land use mix envisioned in the riverfront revitalization strategy. So our last focus area is focused on the commercial node within the Glenshire neighborhood, and then the site on the eastern town limits that was previously known as Canyon Springs. And there are 3 different options for this area. Option 1, of course, is the continuation of the existing general plan, which would continue to allow commercial uses at the corner of Dorchester Drive and Glenshire Drive. and would continue to allow for rural residential development and resource conservation open space on the site previously known as Canyon Springs. Option 2 redesignates the commercial node for mixed use, and that's the area shown in pink on the map, which would allow for some more attached housing and more neighborhood services. And this option would also designate the site previously known as Canyon Springs as planned community. And this designation would be coupled with policies requiring a coordinated planning effort, would allow for the same number of residential units allowed under the 2025 general plan, but requiring that those units be clustered to ensure the provision of open space. The general plan would also include policies within this designation related to protecting environmentally sensitive areas, providing a new trail network, requiring 2 points of ingress and egress for wildfire evacuation, and requiring new homes to meet home hardening design standards to protect them from wildfire. So it's a land use designation coupled with policies. And then option 3 also includes the mixed use designation at the existing commercial node, but reflects the existing general plan land uses at the site on the eastern town limits. However, this option also includes a policy to study options for preserving this site as open space. So similar to the discussion on the Upper MacIver site, there are constraints to a town-initiated redesignation of the property for open space, but this policy would direct the town to explore different tools for open space preservation here. So that's a very brief overview of the focus area options, and my colleague Kim is now going to describe the 6 town-wide land use alternatives.
Thanks, Chelsea. Hi everyone, I'm Kim Untermoser. I'm a planner at Ascent, also helping the town with this effort. I'm going to present to you on the 6 town-wide alternatives that were proposed and evaluated in the briefing book. So the town-wide alternatives are made up of a different combination of focus area land use options, the options that Chelsea presented on. These different options are assembled in different ways to create 6 different town-wide alternatives. And the preferred town-wide alternative that will eventually be inputted into the land use element of the general plan will not necessarily be one of these 6 alternatives, but it could be a hybrid or some sort of modified version of these. Alternative A is a continuation of the existing 2025 general plan. It does have some minor modifications to update land uses to match the new proposed 2040 land use designations. But under this alternative, the type and intensity of development allowed would be the same as what's currently allowed under the town's existing 2025 general plan. Alternative B focuses on a 4-season economy and maximizes the amount of commercial and industrial development that could occur compared to the other alternatives. As you can see, alternative B applies the mixed use medium designation in the gateway area. That's the pink there near Donner Pass Road. And it applies business innovation at the Pioneer Commerce Center that you see there in light purple, and it preserves existing industrial within West River and replaces some mixed use and residential designations with business innovation to further promote employment uses in West River. Alternative C focuses on achievable housing and provides more variety of housing types relative to the other alternatives. This alternative is similar to alternative B in that it applies hospital campus, public, and business innovation, which would all support workforce housing. However, this alternative would also apply high density residential, as you can see with the brown there on the map, and mixed use with the pink areas on the map. It would replace some existing industrial land with business innovation to increase workforce housing opportunities. And it would promote having more multifamily housing near employment uses in the West River area. Medium high density residential would be applied to provide attached housing in the Grays Crossing area. In addition, multifamily housing would be allowed within those mixed use designations at Donner Lake, Glenshire, and along the Donner Pass Road. Alternative D focuses on infill development and supports higher density housing and mixed use infill in the core. This alternative envisions mixed use high along Donner Pass Road and applies high density residential in the Grays Crossing area. You can see that with the dark brown there in focus area 3. This alternative would also include the policy option at the site previously known as Canyon Springs on the eastern edge of town to study ways to preserve that site as open space. Alternative E supports lower intensity growth relative to the other alternatives. This alternative envisions a lower intensity mixed use in the Gateway area and a riverfront mixed use in West River. This alternative would also have a policy to explore options for preserving the Upper McIver site and the area known as Canyon Springs as open space. So you see both of those there with those green icons. So to balance the loss of industrial that's proposed under alternative E in West River, this alternative would include options to redesignate sites near the airport for industrial. The first site is a vacant parcel within the Jurger Ranch specific plan currently designated for open space. And the second site is a partially developed parcel owned by the Truckee-Tahoe Airport that's currently designated for public. One or both of these parcels could be designated for business innovation or industrial uses and would be coupled with policies to support relocation of existing industrial users off of the river. Lastly, alternative F most closely aligns with the town's river revitalization strategy, and it's fairly similar to the four-season economy alternative. This alternative would envision the West River area as a mixed-use and business innovation district, providing for both housing and employment uses. Otherwise, it's pretty much the same as alternative B. So now I'm going to dive into a comparison of these alternatives. Again, these alternatives, not one of them might be the preferred alternative, but it's good to have a comparison to understand what effects these alternatives would have. So this slide compares the total capacity numbers for each of the 6 townwide alternatives. These numbers represent the net new capacity of the amount of development that could potentially occur under each alternative. These numbers do not represent what would be anticipated by 2040, but rather show the total development that could occur if the entire town was built out at its maximum capacity. For single family and multifamily units, you can see that the capacity ranges from about 4,450 new housing units under the existing general plan to about 6,150 new units under alternative D. You can also see that alternatives B through F would support a larger proportion of multifamily housing than under the existing general plan or alternative A. We also looked at the development capacity for commercial, office, and industrial. All of the alternatives would provide more than enough capacity to meet the projected market demand for commercial, retail, and office uses. The additional capacity that's shown here is needed to provide flexibility to meet varying market demands and to allow individual projects to be creative in their design. Although the alternatives would theoretically increase capacity, it will ultimately be the market which will dictate how much development occurs and how much space is actually absorbed. The industrial capacity is a bit trickier. Under alternative A, the existing general plan, the industrial capacity would just barely meet demands. This alternative might not be able to provide the flexibility needed to meet market demands. The other alternatives would all increase the allowed floor area ratio, so that would increase the building space within the industrial designation, and some alternatives would promote industrial in West River. Some would introduce business innovation, which would also allow for more industrial development. Only alternative E really finds new land for industrial uses, and this land was identified to balance the loss of industrial space in West River. The important thing to note is that if the town redesignates existing industrial land for other uses like housing or retail, then it'll be important to find replacement sites if the town wants to retain its industrial job base. So regardless of which alternative is selected, the population of Truckee is expected to grow, and there will be more people needing to get around, resulting in increases in traffic. However, there are several factors that affect traffic patterns: the amount and type of development, behavioral changes, changing the amount of people driving in cars versus biking or walking, and the number of people commuting into or out of Truckee for work. VMT, or vehicle miles traveled, is a metric that measures the miles traveled for all vehicles in a given time period. An increase in trips and trip length result in higher vehicle miles traveled, while a reduction of the number of trips and trip length result in less vehicle miles traveled. VMT tends to be higher in areas with lower density dispersed development and lower in areas with compact infill development because destinations are closer together. Generally, you can expect that with more compact mixed-use development, more people could walk or bike, and fewer people would need to drive a car to get where they need to go. The traffic model does not project the change in driving versus walking or biking, and largely depends on the amount of development that is projected to occur. Since the development capacity is an overprojection and it's not anticipated to occur by 2040, these VMT results are also an overprojection. However, one can expect that VMT will increase, especially if the general plan does not include policies to help move people out of their cars. If you'd like to find out more information about VMT and the traffic analysis, you can look at the briefing book available on the Truckee2040 website. It has a lot more information about the traffic analysis. So the briefing book also provides a high-level comparison of how transit support of each alternative would be. Bus services and routes are generally brought to areas of more compact development, and specific attention is given to workforce and affordable housing developments. All of the alternatives would provide better support for transit compared to the existing general plan, or alternative A. So this slide shows the relative per capita greenhouse gas, or GHG, emissions of each alternative and the potential population increase assumed for each alternative. Per capita emissions are the mass emissions divided by the population increase. As you can see here, alternative D, which has the highest population growth, has one of the lowest per capita GHG emissions. However, alternative A, which has the lowest population growth, has one of the highest per capita GHG emissions. So the increase in GHG emissions is not directly correlated with population growth. Other factors like transportation, development type, and energy use also play a role. When you look at mass emissions, alternative A does have the lowest GHG emissions, whereas alternatives E and F have the highest GHG emissions. The variation in emissions between the alternatives is driven by the mix of land uses and the relative location of the land uses in the town, which affects VMT. Again, it's important to note that the traffic model is based on development capacity that would likely not occur until after 2040. And the model does not consider changes in mode shift or the number of people walking and biking versus driving. The total difference between the lowest emissions scenarios, that's alternative A or the existing general plan, and the highest emissions scenarios, so you'll see there it's alternative F, is approximately 6,200 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And that's about the same as the emissions produced from 1,300 cars driven for 1 year. At this point, these GHG estimates don't include measures that would further reduce emissions from new growth as part of the town's climate action plan or from policies included in the general plan. The climate action plan and the general plan policies are the next step in our process. They will have measures to help reduce emissions from each sector with a strong focus on promoting active transportation and transit and reducing energy use in existing and new buildings in the town, as these are the two largest emission sectors. So that sums up my summary of the alternatives. Feel free to add any questions to the chat. Otherwise, you can also take a look at the briefing book that goes into much more detail and has a lot of great resources. I'm going to hand things back over to Nora. She'll explain how we can go through the small group exercise.
Thank you so much, Kim and Chelsea and Danielle. If we could look at the next slide, please. So we're going to be breaking into some smaller groups. You can expect to be in a group with maybe a few more than 10 people, which would be a great opportunity to really dig into the conversation. I know some of you have been reviewing the briefing book and may be absolutely prepared to dive into the details. And for some of you, what you've just heard from Kim and Chelsea might be inspiring you to take a closer look at those details. And I just want to acknowledge that this isn't the only opportunity, like Danielle mentioned, to participate. So if you feel like you want to start the conversation tonight in your small group, but you're going to need to go back and read the briefing book and then come back to the Saturday Farmers Market and give staff some more input and refine your feedback, that's great too. So what we're going to be doing is using a virtual whiteboard puzzle tool to help us as a small group to discuss the trade-offs of the focus area options, and as a group talk about where we agree that something is the right choice for Truckee, where we disagree about what option might be the right choice for a preferred alternative, but most importantly, for us to talk about the why we prefer what we do, or why we're concerned where we see an option that we don't like or we don't think is a good fit. And our note takers are going to help to record those places where you're concerned or where you feel comfortable and enthusiastic about an option. And that's the type of thing that we'll be reporting back on when we come back together as a large group at about 8:05. And as Kim mentioned, we'll mix and match to create each small group's townwide alternative, but it is really most important that we have that conversation about what you're comfortable with and enthusiastic about and what you're concerned about and why. So, and we could go to the next slide. Some of the questions that we might be asking to understand that why are just straight preference questions. What do you prefer? What do you like about it? Do you have concerns? But also knowing that the focus areas might not reflect everything you're interested in. We can talk in the small groups about land use changes that you think might be appropriate outside of the 5 focus areas or the industrial land question. And if you do already have a townwide alternative, you've read the briefing book and you feel like you see one there that is a good fit with what you'd like to see in Truckee, we can talk about that too. We will be taking about a 5-minute break after the 3rd focus area or so. We have a lot to get through, and work with your small group facilitator if you need to take another break. By no means feel like you're stuck in your seat here. This is a long meeting. So we appreciate your being willing to have these conversations with us. And I think Kim and Chelsea, if I'm not missing anything there, we'll go ahead and dive into our breakout groups.
Thank you, Nora. I'll just quickly add, we do see some questions coming up in the chat, and feel free to use the chat for questions. We do need to keep on schedule and move right into the small groups, but we're going to follow up with some written responses to those questions, or maybe take some time at the end if we have it. So thank you for that. And I think we can break out. We're right on schedule.
Okay, so this takes just a moment. Bear with us as we're getting sent to our groups. You go ahead and accept or join your group when you're invited. Right? Well, what we're going to do then is a real quick lightning round of report outs, because we want to hear the diversity of conversations that were had in the last hour and a half, not just what we heard in our own rooms, So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that each facilitator can go through and give us their quick highlights. So I think we'll just go ahead and start with group 1.
Thanks, Nora. So we had some good dialogue. We probably did not move as many puzzle pieces as some of the other groups, and I think that's okay because it's a lot of information to absorb. For the focus area 1 for Donner Lake, there was more support for option 2. And I think that's just reflective of interest in seeing some mixed use in that area. When we moved to focus area 2, we, again, probably didn't move an exact puzzle piece for that one, but was just a good discussion. And I apologize, I'm a little disjointed from having lost my power. So let me grab some notes here and pull on that. And Allie, you were capturing stuff too. So if you want to jump in while I'm saying stuff, feel free.
Definitely. Yeah, I think the biggest concerns that our group had were about like housing, making sure that there's enough housing, recognizing our current housing crisis, but then also wanting to be thoughtful about where that housing goes, thinking about Glenshire and maybe, that's not as connected to central services. So maybe not there, preference for more of Donner Lake or along Donner Pass Road. Big concerns about the environment and the industrial impact on the surrounding housing. So some concerns around north of 89, but then also out by the airport and thinking about open space and the river as another concern of where that industrial space would maybe go, but then also the impacts it could have on the river or housing. And then just an overall note on how difficult these trade-offs are in weighing them against one another, and that having the whole puzzle piece together makes you recognize that the town is complex and these are difficult decisions to make.
Thanks so much, Allie. Anything you want to wrap up with, Danielle? Are we ready?
I should say that was well said. I was taking notes while I was doing it, but then they got mixed in with everything else. So Allie did an awesome job.
Yes, well, and kudos to your group for making it through the power outage. All right, so we are moving over to breakout room 2, which we know also suffered through the power outage. So Jenna and Emily, how's it looking for you?
Good. I'm just going to run through this real fast. So Donner Lake, we went for option 1. Status quo, general plan, roadways are narrow. That's a constraint. Can't read my handwriting. Anyway, option 1. Gateway, we went for option 4. DPR, too much congestion. Hospital expansion, too much. Not convinced that we need more residential. Add policy option, so kind of adding a hybrid for looking at MacGyver, Upper MacGyver. 89 North, we didn't like any of the options. We want to create our own. We want to keep industrial. We were generally supportive of housing at the Alder Creek Middle School and on Parcel D, and possibly looking at some options for senior housing here as well. River, we voted for option 5, so that's the river revitalization strategy. That was pretty solidly supported within our group. Keep industrial possibly on the north side, and that we really need to be thoughtful about eliminating industrial. But we also need to look at other places to put it, like Pioneer Commerce Center. Glenshire, Eastern Truckee, option 5, solid support there. We need to look at fire safety, greenhouse gas emissions, and we felt confident that in some of the up zones that we made within focus areas 2, 3, and 4, that the lost units within Canyon project, formerly known as Canyon Springs, could be absorbed elsewhere within other focus areas. Townwide alternatives, really didn't have any time for that. We just did some big picture stuff, which I'll just save for the group. And then industrial discussion. We need to get more granular into what we're allowing within West River Street and Pioneer Commerce Center, and we voted for option 2. And we did not move any puzzle pieces, sorry. That's it.
Thank you, Jenna. All right, let's move quickly then to breakout room 3. So this is Yumi and Laura.
Hi, both, I lost video, so, and Laura doesn't have video, so our group was facilitated by ghosts. So
we can hear you loud and clear.
Good. We had good consensus on the first 3 focus areas. Donner Lake everyone wanted more mixed use. They thought the flexibility was good for property owners and for homeowners nearby. In the Gateway area, there was interest in increasing the density in the Gateway area and potentially even higher to allow for more walkability and pedestrian friendliness. On 89, there was more interest in the medium high density residential. They wanted to see some more, overall, they wanted to see in these higher density residential areas, some more neighborhood serving uses to reduce vehicle emissions and to create a more compact development that doesn't require driving. For the last 3 items, we didn't really get much consensus. I guess there was consensus on the hybrid for West River. There was interest in doing hybrid of number 3 and number 5. They like the access to the river, but they wanted to move the higher density housing off the river and allow for the mixed use on the river so that it'll allow for commercial uses on the river. In Glenshire, there wasn't much consensus. There was consensus on the mixed use medium, doing mixed use medium at the west side of Glenshire near the commercial area. But there was some desire to look at achievable housing options on the site formerly known as Canyon Springs, or keeping it the same with the same density that's under the current general plan. For the industrial area, there was acknowledgement that there was a desire to move industrial uses off of West River Street, and this may be the location that we need to look at for that space. But there was some mention that the open space is well fought for, and so that maybe we need to keep it. So we didn't get to the townwide alternative discussion, but overall we had a very lively group and wanted more density, wanted to look at single family housing types that serve ownership, or smaller single family housing types that are for sale. So that's all I had in a nutshell.
Thanks, Yumi. Appreciate that. Okay, we're going to move on to breakout room 4. So this is Chantal and Jamie, and there we are.
Great. Yeah, we had a great discussion, great ideas, great comments. So starting with Donner Lake, we didn't come to consensus on either of the options. Our group members wanted to know, what do the Donner Lake owners think about this? There were some concerns about increasing traffic and congestion there, but also acknowledging that some additional neighborhood serving commercial would be great, but what does that look like, and how do we address the congestion and the lack of parking? For the Gateway area, our group wanted to see the Upper MacGyver study on all of the options, not just on option 2, being that it was very important to keep Upper MacGyver as open space, and they wanted to see that study. However, Gateway was discussed as a great option for higher density residential, maybe not as high as 5 stories, but definitely a spot where they could see some additional residential. Save Mart and Safeway could be revitalized, and could this be a spot for senior housing? So definitely the highlight on the open space study being an option. For the North 89 discussion, Pioneer Commerce Center, our group likes the biz innovation uses, but also agree that potentially it could be a place to locate some more industrial uses. They like the idea of additional workforce housing with Alder Creek and potentially in Pioneer Commerce Center. Definitely kind of, thoughtful on needing more housing in our town. Option 3 seemed to be more gravitated towards, but 4 could be okay. West River, pretty much everybody highlighted that the river is a very important resource. That would be great if we could move industrial off of there and keep the river kind of as a focal point of our town. There was a potential, could heavier industrial be moved to the rear of the biz innovation parcel, and something that has a better streetscape be on West River, like a lighter with the biz innovation kind of on the streetscape. 5, we had consensus. I think everybody was into option 3 with the exploration of keeping the site formerly known as Canyon Springs as open space. There was concern about housing on that location, wildfire risk, access. Definitely a preference for seeing that as open space.
And finally,
then for
on
the
industrial.
I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead. Just keep moving.
Oh, and for industrial, a consensus that option 2 seems like the best idea, that the open space had been promised to be open space and that it should remain, but the airport parcel could be a great spot, or could be a spot to move the industrial off of West River. Some overarching comments that were kind of echoed throughout all was the need for senior housing, the need to maybe prohibit STR, so new housing was going to be available for residents of the town, that the general plan should look at deed restricted housing, and that we need expanded transit, and some other comments. So great discussion. We didn't really get to the townwide alternative because we didn't pick an option for each one, and didn't use those puzzle pieces.
Thanks, Chantal. All right, so next up is room 5 with Andrea and Mary Beth. And Andrea, if you can be as succinct as you can while still being meaningful, that would be awesome.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'll be brief, but I just want to thank my group. We had great discussions. So for focus area 1, the group chose option 2 because they really like the idea of having mixed use and hoping that that would help reduce traffic, you know, less trips to town. You know, they just really love that idea. For focus area 2, we didn't fully have a consensus, so we called it 2.5. And this was the idea of having mixed use medium, so which is option 3, but keeping the open space at the upper MacIver Hill. And then for focus area 3, option 3 was chosen. They like everything that this option had to offer: workforce housing, business innovation, and they also really wanted to see higher densities in this focus area because they felt that since it's close to the freeways, that it would be the best place to have higher densities. Then for focus area 4, we didn't like any of the options, so we created our own. So we would like to see industrial north of West River Street, but having riverfront mixed use on the south of West River Street by the river. And then for focus area 5, option 3 was chosen. Everybody liked the idea of the mixed use on the site 1, but for the other side, that's where we had a little bit more of disagreements. Some people would like to see Canyon Springs stayed as open space, but other people thought that it might be better that it would be a great place to have achievable housing. And then for the industrial sites, on this one, we really couldn't come up with a consensus. Some really liked the idea of continuing the uses that the general plan has now, while others felt like site 2, which is right next to the airport, would be a good site to have industrial. And we did actually get to the townwide alternatives. And I think the overall sentiment was that they want to see more housing types of all kinds, including achievable housing. They also want to see more of a mix of commercial uses and be able to diversify the economy. And at the end of the day, they just want to be able to create a more vibrant community.
Thanks, Andrea. All right, we're going to move on quickly here. Kevin and On, go ahead, lightning round.
Thanks, Nora. I'm very aware of the time, and I'll keep this brief, but I would say that we had a very healthy discussion, lots of conversation reflected by the number of notes that are provided here from individual commenters on each focus area. You'll note we did not, perhaps one focus area being focus area 4, we were having some consensus about a particular puzzle piece. We were not finding the individual puzzle pieces to gather a majority opinion about what would be appropriate in composing a townwide alternative. But we had lots of nuanced conversation about the attributes of each particular option, and those are noted in the comments here for the town staff and the consultant team to consider. I would say just thematically that there were a couple of topics that were capturing attention, including open space, housing, for open space being the retention of that's existing now in our our areas that are been discussed tonight, and then providing for workforce housing for local residents. And I think with that, I'm going to stop there. There were a couple of comments that we've captured in the chat and sent on to the team, and I'll pass it on to the next group.
Thank you so much. Chelsea, do you mind if we go to you next, and then I will go ahead and wrap up with group 7.
Yeah, that's fine. So in group 8, I would say we had pretty solid consensus on each of the focus areas. For Donner Lake, there was support for option 2, the mixed use, felt that it creates more flexibility to bring services and then options for senior housing or more affordable housing types. Some concerns were expressed around traffic, but especially safety related to evacuation. For focus area 2, most of the votes were for option 3, the mixed use medium, but coupled with the study of preserving open space on the Upper MacGyver site. And for focus area 3, votes were mostly for option 3, the medium high density residential, felt that this density was more consistent with the nearby Hennis Flat. But there was also some noted interest in keeping industrial at Pioneer Commerce, but most votes were for option 3. For West River, our group had a lot of support for the riverfront mixed use and the master planning of this area to really enhance the town's character, but would want to see limitations on the number of single family units, and also that this would be predicated on finding replacement for the industrial land that's currently in West River. So I'm just going to jump down to the industrial land. Our group supported option 2, which is keeping site 1 as open space. There was some concern expressed around the legality of converting that to open space. And then for site 2, designating that as industrial, but some noted concerns around safety and the airport. And then for focus area 5, there was unanimous support for preserving the area as open space, but also felt that option 3 was a risk because if it wasn't preserved as open space, it would default back to the existing general plan. So our group chose option 2, but proceeded by a good faith effort to preserve as open space. And there was a lot of discussion around maintaining wildlife corridors and habitat for sensitive species and concerns around sprawl and VMT. And our group also wanted to see a policy added to option 2 to plan for public transportation. All right, thank you.
Great.
I'll pass it to you, Nora.
All right, thanks, Chelsea. Okay, so quickly from group 7, like group 1, we didn't do a great job of getting puzzle pieces on the map, in part because we didn't have clear consensus, and what we did have was great conversation and a lot of good questions asked. So you see here in the big sticky notes in the bottom what some of our takeaways were. Where we had the highest levels of agreement were around industrial land, mechanisms for ensure, and when I say industrial land, this is the group felt very strongly that it was not appropriate for the town to be considering redesignating the open space parcel that had been received as a gift to the town. So that to group 7 was not really a credible option. Mechanisms for ensuring locals and workforce housing could be built in areas where they're designated. There was a lot of discussion around that. Deed restricted housing, locals housing, looking at ways to pair policies that would make it really work. Creative ways to provide open space with that policy option in Glenshire, and thinking in Glenshire, is there existing capacity with that existing commercial, liking to see some creative thinking around there. And similarly, the group was interested in some creative thinking around the potential that the town might have with the commercial designations it currently has, and could some of that be used for industrial, for example, around Pioneer Center. Areas of dissent, we did have some difference of opinion on the airport property should be an industrial option, and that would be viable. And then there's just a lot of strong sentiment in our group also about the value of the river, and could there be some a middle road solution with revitalization of some of the industrial around West River rather than some redesignation. So with that, I just want to thank everyone, particularly our note takers, for capturing all of this detail. As you see when I zoom out, what an artifact we have of these conversations. So thanks again for that. Tracy, I'm going to stop sharing, and if you can pull up the slides so that we can wrap up here. So for those of you who feel like you said what you wanted to tonight and you're ready to just tune into the next step, this information will be informing the process as the land use alternatives go back before the GPAC and then through the Planning Commission and the Town Council for the Town Council to ultimately select that preferred alternative to help the general plan update process advance. But if you feel like you just sort of got a taste of it tonight and want to go back and dig into the briefing book and come back for further conversations, then this Saturday at the farmers market, as well as next Tuesday, are good opportunities to talk with town staff. Online survey, a questionnaire, the online survey will be live tomorrow. A recording of this meeting's plenary session and this report back will be available likely Saturday morning. So if you'd like to respond via survey or you'd like to share the information about these online opportunities with friends who weren't able to participate, that would be great as well. Any final words from our town staff before we wrap up here?
I would just like to, again, thanks everyone for participating. This is one of the highest levels of participation that we've had. Just knowing that people are engaged really is awesome. And we hope to see you in other forms of engagement with the general plan.
I want to echo that.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, staff and all the staff of Ascent. This has been an incredible turnout. And I really look forward to gleaning all the information from tonight.
Thanks so much, Mayor Klevstad. All right, let's, Tracy, if you can just leave this up for a moment if people need to take down these dates or click through. But this concludes the meeting this evening, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one. So thanks so much.